In the beginning, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat.
No, Odysseus, let him rack his brains with you and the other captives how to fight.
Guilty.
Impossible. Trust me. I told
No one to weep for me, my friends. No wedding song.
Amo verumque cano, Troiae qui primus laboris Italiam
Dante ha fatto il pieno e per gli altri è rimasto ben poco, which means that Dante filled up.
I was the more deceived.
Confess that you were very bad to hurt my feelings.
Cried Candide, I'm through.
Enough. Who are you then?
Part of that force which would do evil evermore, and yet
She was eating a maraschino ice at that precise moment.
There is no
When
explanation.
Gregor Samsa woke up one morning, he found himself changed in his bed into a monstrous dung beetle.
Hi again. Lesson 13. We're halfway through our journey, much like Dante was last week, halfway through his journey. And we're going to continue this first hour with Hamlet and then make a rather dramatic shift from the very dark and mysterious world of Hamlet to the absolutely mad and bright light of Tartuffe. We'll begin with questions, but before I do, I want to upbraid you a little bit for last week. I had a sense in last week's Hamlet class that you were treating Hamlet with kid gloves a little bit. You were a little bit tentative with Hamlet. Am I right about that? That you have a sense of coming to Hamlet, you know, with capital H-A-M-L-E-T, and there is this awesome structure that we have to bow down before. And I want to try to change your attitude a little bit about Hamlet, although it is difficult because, goodness, you've been reading about Hamlet since you were a child. You know it is the great English play. If you have to point to one great English play, it's usually this one. And you, as you read Hamlet as an adult, how many lines do you hear that you've heard before? You know, and you really do have the sense of being in the presence of something very serious, very large, and very cultural, you know, in the worst sense of that term. But I want to warn you that there is no such thing as the play. And you know what I mean by that? The play does not exist in time and space independently of the viewer of the play. And all I mean by that is that there is no meaning, single meaning, a meaning to this play that you have to try to decode. What's extraordinary about this play is that every reader and every playgoer who comes to it comes away from it with a sense of its greatness. Almost everyone. That is, you know, obviously there are some beginning readers who get lost in the language of the play and just, you know, can't get out of it. But for most people, we bring ourselves to the play and then we come out of the play somewhat different. And also think about how a play works. When you're reading a play, you're reading merely the text of the play. You're reading merely the words. And you don't need me to tell you that actors do not stand stiff on the stage, recite the words, and then the audience shifts its attention to the other actor. You know, there's lots of movement going on. There's intonation going on. There's speech going on. In short, the words do not become the play until two other, or actually three other participants make the words into a play. That is, you have the author who has created the words. Then you have the actor who interprets the words. And let's admit they can be very different. I can take the same words and make them mean any of a number of different things, clearly, simply through voice intonation. Then we have a director who stages the presentation of the words. And necessary, of course, is an audience who perceives all of this. You, as a poor reader, are thrust into the middle here and have to do all of that sort of thing. So there are all sorts of interpretations of Hamlet out there, and not all of them, but many of them are quite valid. I mean, they make absolute sense depending on how the play is performed and how the play is staged. So it's really somewhat fallacious of us to talk about Hamlet the text. It really makes much more sense to talk about Hamlet the production. And I'm sure some of you have seen many productions of Hamlet, different productions of Hamlet. And they're really quite different, aren't they? The most famous one being probably still the Olivier one, which is, I mean, it's just right from Ernst Jones, you know. I mean, it's Olivier, the Freudian, you know, clearly in love with his mother. You have the Derek Jacobi one that was recent. You have the Mel Gibson, which is Hamlet Light, that was just done, that was just done for the movies, you know, which was quite different. So you all get my point here. So I'm asking you not to be quite so nervous and tentative in the presence of this play. I will admit it is a huge play, and I will admit that it deals with huge issues. But it's also a quite human play, and it's what's really remarkable about the play is how alive it is. There is no doubt in my mind that my son, who's about to go off to college, is going to come back seeing a very different Hamlet from the one I saw when I went to college. And that's what's so remarkable about this play. Barbara?
I saw a modern Hamlet with Aidan Quinn, the
terrific actor.
Chicago actor. Yeah. And it was done in modern dress. I think he was wearing blue jeans and a T-shirt.
A student.
Yeah,
sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, it was Hamlet, and I just find rereading certain portions to bone up again on this. I mean, you can reread it and still find new things in it all the time. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, it's very allusive too, isn't it? I mean, it's very much poetic drama, and so much of what it says is said through metaphor. You have the metaphor of the garden, which you may remember from Genesis 3. The metaphor of the garden, which just figures centrally in Western literature and in other literatures as well. Very much a part of this play, right? The king goes out into the garden to take his nap, right? And a serpent stings him, and the serpent, I've put in quotation marks here, right? Hamlet at the beginning talks about Denmark as a rank, unweeded garden, you know? Lots of metaphors, sickness metaphors running through it, art metaphors running through it, how art can conceal. The king Claudius talks about his painted word and how his painted word hides his deeds. How true, right? People say one thing, they do another. The metaphor of painting running all the way through the play. Conversely, Hamlet talking about how art holds, 'tis were the mirror up to nature. Rather than conceal, art reveals. You know, we have all of these metaphors running through the play. So you're right; it's a very allusive play. You know. Yes, Valeria.
Is Hamlet so memorable because he represents the human condition all in one man, where sometimes in some plays you need a few other characters to supplement that human condition?
That's a huge question. I always am a little, I'll be frank with you that maybe this is a generational thing, but I get nervous about human condition. I'm not sure. We used to talk about that, you know, that various characters revealed the human condition, but I'm not quite sure what that is. Do we see ourselves in Hamlet? Yes. I mean, I think I would answer the question that way. Are there aspects of ourselves that we see in Hamlet? Yes. Is he the sum total of human condition? That's human condition that you put up on the side of library walls. You chisel it in, you know, and I'm a little nervous with that. Yeah.
Maybe we see ourselves in him because he had these choices to make, these difficult choices of duty and responsibility. We found him to be a reluctant hero, and I think part of that was because he was a student. We discovered that, a thinking, philosophical person. And I don't think he believed entirely in that theory of revenge. That did not seem to spark a passion in him. And you had brought up last week what we thought the fatal flaw was. And that inability to act because he really didn't believe in the facet of revenge. He didn't really, he had many opportunities, or several opportunities to do it, and he didn't take it up.
There's a side of him that seems to want to believe in it. That is, how many times during the course of the play does he upbraid himself for not acting? You know, there's a side of him that wishes that he were more Laertes-like or Fortinbras-like. Remember I talked last week about there are 3 sons in the play all dealing with revenge. issues in a way.
Well, maybe that's the thing. He has revenge models all around him, but that's not where he is.
That's right. He rejects. I'd like to phrase it a little differently, and this is a little bit psychoanalytic, but I think you'll enjoy this. Hamlet is confronted in many ways with the problem that Henry IV is confronted with. Are you familiar with Henry IV, Part 1 and Part 2, where it's the coming of age of the prince, of Prince Hal. You remember this is story, Prince Hal and his buddy Falstaff, the big fat guy in the tavern, you know, and these disreputable types. And Hal has to become king, and what you see during the process of the Henry plays is Hal growing up, Hal realizing that while Falstaff represents lots of good things, and there's a joie de vivre there, there's an honesty there, there's all of these qualities, they are not the ideal qualities for a king. And he must ultimately reject Falstaff for a different model, for a different Henry. And I wonder if Hamlet doesn't have the same problem. I wonder if Hamlet is not also confronted with two fathers, one of whom he's idealized and one of whom he sees only in armor, you know, in memory. The ghost is in armor. He's very much the heroic father, a kind of age that we've been reading about, the early half of this term. You're familiar with the code. You're familiar with what it demands of a man. It demands, and I use that gender term by design, it demands certain behavior from the man.
Warrior.
Exactly.
Yes.
One of the things it doesn't demand is sensitivity. Remember poor Laertes talking about when he gets news of Ophelia's death, he talks about his tears coming out, and he says once they've been done, that woman's side of him will be put by. That's weakness. Woman equals weakness, you see, in this code. And he must put that by. So you might think of the play in those terms. If we can tame the play, this play can be read on so many different levels, but one of the ways it can be read is of Hamlet trying to define his identity during the course of the play. Which father is he going to embrace? And of course, he wants to embrace the one, but he finds himself more and more, I think, acting like the other. And it's really quite a struggle for him during the course of the play.
I think for Hamlet, it's like his loss of innocence. Like when you're a child, you worship your father. Everything he does is perfect and right. And as you grow older, you realize they're not. Always, and he's seeing this. I know, I'm the perfect mother, too. I'm an exception to the rule. But that's what I could see in him as his loss of innocence. He's having to face that there really are evil things, and his father maybe wasn't the perfect person.
But his father laid a heavy burden on him.
Sure did.
Cursed spite that I was made to set it right.
That's right. The time is out of joint. It's not, Hamlet doesn't simply have the revenge motive to deal with. It's the whole time that's out of joint for Hamlet. And he somehow thinks of himself as chosen to set it right. Fathers do, of course, put heavy burdens on their sons to become males. I mean, that's ingrained in our society. It used to be done ritualistically, tribally. You'd have the rite de passage, you'd have the initiation ritual in which once, on one day you're a boy, an experience happens, then you're a man. What is that today? We don't have it, or if we have it, it's terribly debased. And same for a woman. At one point you were a girl, something happens, and then you are a woman. And yes, Hamlet, I talked about it last week in those terms to you. Remember, I talked about it and we saw in the Mick Hattaway clip where I referred to Hamlet as an adolescent. Hamlet very much bemoaning the fact that the world won't conform to how he thinks it ought to be, that stark sense that the adolescent has between right and wrong.
He's learning.
And he has to learn that, boy, it's a world of grays, it's a world where it's hard to know what is from what seems. It's very, very difficult. And so his classic procrastination might be seen rather as a desire to know before he acts. Perfectly desirable quality in someone, I should think, right? To know the facts before acting on them. And so the procrastination then becomes not some kind of horrible flaw, but it becomes something that we're all prone to, wanting to make the right decision based on the best available evidence. The problem, of course, as tragedies always remind us, is that evidence can be terribly misleading. It's not so simple. Chad, let me go Chad and then Ray.
Okay, I'm thinking maybe his tragic flaw is more his almost need to cling to a sense of duty, because when he first meets his father's ghost, or what we assume to be his father's ghost charges him to avenge him.
Yes.
But at the same time saying, oh, well, leave your mother alone. So it's a sort of his father saying, okay, you are personally responsible for my revenge against my brother, but, you know, your mother is, leave her alone. And then throughout the play, Hamlet could be seen as struggling with this sense of duty, since he had several opportunities to kill his uncle, but yet he didn't. And only at the very end, when the final duel, when he goes at it wholeheartedly, maybe at that point he realizes, well, yeah, this is my duty, and I've come to accept that.
Or maybe, let me muddy the water, or maybe he knows he's about to die. So. You know, that's what's so fascinating about this play. Every time one of you will say something about this play, it'll drive you crazy, but it's part of the fun of it. Every time you say something about this play, I'll be able to say, yeah, but, and you'll go, oh, and you see what happens to you? You get in the same position as Hamlet. You see the way the play traps you in, you know? That's what I love about this play, is that we enter into Hamlet's dilemma when we read the play, when we experience the play. Because here, the king is at prayer. Whoa, you know. But the king really wasn't at prayer, you know. And if I run him through at prayer, I'm going to send him to heaven. But if you had run him through, you wouldn't. You know, it's like, oh, no. And the whole play is like that. It's a real smoke and mirrors kind of experience. So, yeah, I agree with what you say, but, and that's the fun of this play, is I can always but.
But if there wasn't a ghost, of his father, would Hamlet have acted without being told? I mean, can we put this into a little more context here? This young man comes back, and his father is dead, his uncle has married his mother and taken over the kingdom. But you had said before that this was done democratically through an election of some kind.
Yeah.
So that, you know, he came into this not suspecting murder at the time.
If you separate out, this is an interesting way into the play, if you separate out the revenge factor, I know this is kind of crazy, this is silly on the surface of it, but do it anyway, take that away, what is it that's bothering Hamlet in Act 1?
That his mother married his uncle.
You got it. What's bothering him? It's not so much the death of the father. He's grieving his father, for sure. Let's not make light of that. But what really offends him is what his mother has done. It really offends him. Yeah. Now, what offends him so much?
So soon. She did it so soon.
So soon, a couple months.
The haste and the incestuous. He calls it the incestuous.
He does. That's wonderfully ambiguous in the play.
Yes.
You know, you've all got a footnote that says, yes, they were incestuous. You know, believe me, that's debatable. That's not. Don't trust your footnotes all the time. And the court doesn't seem to have any problem with it. So the world of the Hamlet play does not seem overly disturbed about the relationship between Claudius and Gertrude. In fact, quite the contrary. They're quite supportive of this marriage. So how come it's everybody but Hamlet? What's the problem here? His mother, yeah, but what about his mother? Is there anybody besides me that thinks maybe it's his mother's sexuality that's driving him crazy?
She's too old. He says she's too old. Yeah.
You got it.
You're way past
You got it. Yeah, he'll change his tune when he's 50 or 60. But yes, you're right.
Mothers just don't do that.
Mothers don't do that. Thank you. You said it. Yes, exactly. Yes. And so he is horrified at the notion that this image of a mother he once had, which is so classically Western male, right? What do we do with our mothers? You got it. Pure. She is the repository of all virtue, according to Hamlet. And what does she do? She hops in the sack with his uncle. oh, you know? And she likes it, you know? We're not talking about close your eyes and think of England here, you know? Queen Victoria's famous advice to wedding night brides, you know? Close your eyes and think of England, not Gertrude. Yeah, that's what's wonderful about Gertrude. That's what's so wonderful about the actresses portraying Gertrude, is she's very lusty. What I liked, for example, about the what's the one I was just making fun of? The Mel Gibson one was Glenn Close. Oh, she was marvelous, wasn't she? She was strong and lusty and physical. And yeah, but ooh, men don't like their women. Well, men do like their women that way. They don't like their mothers that way. Yeah. There's a big difference. Yeah, and it taints the entire world for him if his mother can behave this way. If the paragon of virtue can behave this way, goodness gracious, what about the rest of us crawling, as he says, between earth and heaven? Those of us who are not up on pedestals. Yeah.
Well, it seems also that he was making some assumptions about his father and his mother.
Go ahead, explain.
Right, well, that they were companions at this point, maybe. If you follow this line of reasoning we've just been following, that there wasn't sex in their relationship either, especially.
Well, the father, you know, it's the father, it's Hamlet Sr. who introduces the notion of incestuous. It's him, isn't it, who is really offended by this relationship.
Well, if he knows his brother killed him,
yeah.
He knows his brother killed him, and he feels now to get his wife.
Yeah.
Whether she knew it or not.
Yeah. We don't know, of course. We never know what Gertrude knew about that. Yeah. So how about that? You think that's Hamlet's problem? And it's not that he loves his mother. It's not. Olivier is wrong. It's not that he wants to put his head in his mother's lap and put his arms around her waist and climb back into the womb or something. It's, oh dear, Mom does it. Oh dear, yeah.
Is it something as simple as Hamlet trying to understand life? You know, Plato says you can't teach philosophy to the youth. They're too caught up in their emotions. And I think, you know, he's struggling to know, but he can't because all these emotional things are involved.
But yeah, but even these emotional things he controls. He keeps under control, and I would demonstrate that through his madness, although there are times when you do wonder, as everyone in the play wonders, how much of this is real and how much of this is feigned. He does say, at seemingly the height of his madness, he says to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, I am mad north by northwest. I am mad when it suits me. I'm in control of this situation. You know? So I don't know. I mean, your question's a good one, you know. Is he impetuous? Yeah, sure he is. Is he given to flights of emotion? Yeah, sure he is. But of course, here again, we're looking in the mirror. Who of us isn't, you know? Yeah, Charlie.
What was Eliot's phrase concerning Hamlet?
I believe he called it the Mona Lisa of literature.
Well, I thought it was more like an artistic failure.
Oh, yes, because it didn't have the objective correlative. Yeah, right.
What could it expand on that?
Yeah, he just felt that it was we could not understand Gertrude, and we could not understand Ophelia because there was nothing in the play that helped us. I don't want to get us into the technical objective correlative. I'll put that in the study guide because that's a fairly complex idea. But yeah, Eliot was troubled by this play, as many critics have been troubled by this play, because it doesn't follow. It doesn't have a tremendous interior self-logic. You can't point to certain things. But there's the cause. You know, there's the cause. You can't find it.
I was thinking that perhaps, you know, Shakespeare was such a student of the Bible. I noticed some parallels there when Hamlet feigned madness. That reminded me of David, when David feigned madness in order to escape from the king Saul.
Yeah, that's part of the common frame of reference he can expect in his audience. And not the groundlings. You'll notice in this play how almost cruel he is in his comments about the groundlings, how they... Remember when he's talking to the players, having them prepare the dumb show, the mousetrap? And he talks about how the groundlings just, they don't get anything. You know, they just like a lot of spectacle and a lot of song. But the common frame of reference for the larger audience, those who were in the good seats, as they say, would be the two strains that we've read to date.
But you know,
is the Bible on the one hand and the classics on the other.
Hamlet seems to have encompassed so many of the characters in the Bible. I mean, he's one time he's Saul, another time he's David, then he's a prophet, and then he's you know, it's just maybe those facets of his life are all characters from the Bible. It seems as though I could just. There's so many of them.
I think what you're pointing to is the vibrancy of literature to capture character.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things the Bible is on its first level anyway is a collection of really first-rate literature. Yeah, and I think that's probably
but all
what
these
the reference
characters
would
have
be.
different emotions and different failings. They have that.
Sure.
They all have that one fatal flaw.
Yeah.
I thought that Hamlet was original.
Oh, no.
Shakespeare,
Yeah,
and
no,
I read on, it had been an old folk tale and very, very similar situation.
Few of Shakespeare's things are original. Yeah.
I don't mean to be flip about this, but it seems that, well, if you could reduce this to a current reading of types of people, he's a very right-brained person in a very left-brained world. And the entire play plays on that and emphasizes it.
Hemisphericity is, you know, it's really being questioned now, believe it or not. You know, after all these decades of how left brain, right brain.
But he'd have the messy desk.
Yeah, right. Now, tell us what you mean by that. Yeah.
The sort of trickster quality, the mutability, and the approach, the questioning, and not being able to decide on a course of action because there are so many choices open.
So he's too linear?
No, not linear at all.
Okay, all right. That's what I wanted you
in
to
a very
make clear.
ordered world that has its own expectations and, well, order in itself.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, and you know, of course, that that's not very manly, is it?
Right.
That's traditionally the home of the softer virtues, as they say in the old world. Yeah.
Well, I read, of course, always in How Would I Act, or This Could Be My Family. And thinking about one of my children being gone and her father dying and coming home to find that I had married someone else quickly or not letting them know, I'm sure if his ghost had said, you've got to kill them, they wouldn't have the vaguest idea how to proceed.
Sure.
I mean, he has no written textbook. Of course he's going to try and then say, no, it can't be the way that it's going to work. He couldn't have meant that, back and forth. I mean, he behaves in my fashion very logically.
I agree. And I would also say that we need to remind ourselves at every turn of what Laertes reminded Ophelia of when Laertes was warning Ophelia about Hamlet, which is that the royal does not have the freedom of choice that the non-royal has. Remember, Laertes' lesson is very strict on that. Be careful of this guy, you know, because ultimately when he chooses a bride, it's not going to be you, Ophelia. It's going to be somebody of higher birth, right? And Gertrude, in her defense, and Claudius, in his defense, need to consolidate power here. I mean, they are not just free beings like you and me, you know? They represent something. They become representatives of the body politic. Here we go with that metaphor from the great chain of being. And that body politic needs a head. That body politic cannot go without a head. And of course, the group elects Claudius as the head. And so you know, that's just to muddy the waters a bit in the choice.
Then it might even still have been possible, because Hamlet's referred to as the heir apparent still, that the normal course of events, Claudius dying before he did, he might still have been king.
Absolutely true.
Eventually.
Absolutely true. In fact, that's held out to him during the course of the play, although I don't think he means it. But that's, you know, but now you're into motivation. You don't know to what extent he means it. Yeah.
But also there are hints that the popular choice would have been for Hamlet rather than Claudius. That while the people that are the electors in the constitutional process may have selected Claudius, the popular sympathy is with Hamlet.
Yes, and what's interesting for us as readers, I agree with you, and what's interesting for us as readers is how right or wrong that choice would have been for Hamlet as king. You know, you wonder. See, what's interesting in this play is, watch the rabble in this play. I mean, look how quickly they turn on Claudius when Laertes comes back. You know, they're like, make Laertes king, you know. There's this distrust of the rabble that is just written into our culture. Be careful of the vox populi. The voice of the people. The vox populi can be very, very dangerous. It can be swayed easily by demagogues and by emotions, by passions. No, sorry, I'm apolitical today.
Why wasn't Hamlet offered the kingdom? And yet he wouldn't have, he wanted to be a student. He wanted to go back to the university. I don't know that he would have been.
Well, I can't answer that question, of course, you know, but it probably is they perceive things about his personality that would make him singularly unfitting to be a king.
And the man for the time is part of it.
Do you want, I mean, this is what Mick Hattaway asked. Remember in last week when we were when I had the Mick Hattaway insert, he said, in Claudius's defense, he might be a good king even though he's a bad man. Why must a bad man make a bad king? Conversely, must a good man by definition make a good king? We all know from our recent political experience in America the answer to those questions, you know? I mean, Richard Nixon, probably the most tortured and complex and morally ambiguous president in our recent history. There have been times in the recent past where any number of people have wished to hell he were back in office in moments of crisis, you know. And a good man like, and I'm being a little cartoonish here, but you get a very good man like Jimmy Carter becoming just paralyzed in the office of the presidency, talking ultimately about a great malaise, you know. Those questions are very interesting and still very modern, you know. I mean, you guys just, you put Danny back, Danny Rostenkowski back, you know. Who cares? He broke a few laws, you know. He's the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. He gets things done. We'll vote. Chicago politics, right? It's Hamlet writ anew. Let's talk about what's modern about this play. We have so much we need to talk about. What do you think of as modern, particularly modern in this play?
It's the background diplomacy with Fortinbras, and then we only want to go through with all our army because we're really attacking Poland. You know?
That's right.
And he believes it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Other things? Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, the politics, real power politics, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, it almost is like Rostenkowski. They chose the man for the time. They looked at Hamlet and they looked at Claudius and they thought, right now, Claudius is the man.
Yeah.
Now,
and he's every inch the king, isn't he? In Act One, he does all the right things.
He really is.
Yeah.
But then, you know, they knew Hamlet's a young man. Maybe later that may even have been something they thought of. And in our own time, a man or a woman could be right for this time, and the next officer in might need to be entirely different.
Well, that's usually the way it works, isn't it? Yes, you get the
manipulations of power behind the scenes. That's very up to date. Modern.
Yes, indeed. Boy, the intrigue at court. Everybody's spying on everybody. You see all the spying going on? Everybody's set loose on everybody else, and normal relationships break down in the process. You know, the normal mother-son, father-son. Friendship, lover, I mean, they all collapse in these.
But now Rostenkowski's case, it seems like most people, what this may be saying is not, we forgive you, Danny, but we need health care reform.
Yes, we need things, and you'll get them done.
Basically feel like maybe the president's plan is where we want to be. We are not going to sacrifice a man who it looks like even the president believes is the one to get it through.
Yeah, we really do wrestle with this issue of the good man, good leader,
And
good person, good leader.
Claudius was playing real power politics when he said, and if England remembers, they will see that Hamlet's death is achieved. That was quite a marker to call in.
Yeah, absolutely true. You get a sense too in this world, don't you, that that you're set loose in this world, and man, it's hard to find your compass. You know, you're kind of out. You go into the shadowland, and it's like woof. You know, where's the right? Where's the wrong? What do I do? How do I do it? What's the consequence? Who am I going to hurt? Give me more data. Give me more data. And you get kind of paralyzed.
Well, you talk about data. Hamlet didn't feel that he could just come right out and kill the king himself. He had to have the play. He had to have this proof for the people. Mm-hmm. He believed a ghost that, that such and such happened. I think he would have made a terrible king. I think he's very impulsive, and I do find him revengeful, too. He talks about passion being, making a slave of man, and he probably means sexual passion and for a woman. But his passion was revenge. And I think he was just as much ruled by that in the anti-Greek terms as he was by any other emotion. I find him very impulsive and revengeful, very impulsive.
Okay, yeah.
But I think his revenge was somewhat appointed to him. He was told to take revenge. Would he have done it without? I don't know.
Who knows, of course, but it does seem unlikely. It does seem unlikely. It does seem that he's temperamentally unsuited for generating that revenge motif himself. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask that we go to the VCR now. I asked Professor Hattaway, Mick Hattaway, the author, I can't stop plugging this wonderful little book about how modern a play Hamlet is. And let's hear what Mick says. For most of our students coming to Hamlet for the first time, they're aware of a world very different from their own. What about Hamlet is particularly modern?
Well, it's modern in all kinds of ways. The character of Hamlet has obviously got a kind of protean quality, and by that I mean that practically anybody can fit himself into the role. That's one thing to say. But it's also a play which is unlike our own world in that it's about really a very small community, a community that is based upon a court. And it's small, but that community, of course, in early modern terms, is all-powerful. One of the things that one would note, I think, if one were looking at the period of Shakespeare, is the way that the court is becoming more and more important. The state is moving over into being a far more centralized affair. Now, within the small and closed community, everybody, of course, is very watchful of everybody else. People are working out who's in, who's out. People are spying on one another. And so it's modern in the sense that we are perhaps rather obsessed with the growth of the state in our century, with the way that we can be overheard technologically and so on, although of course we live in a far more diffused kind of political community than they did in Shakespeare's time. But I think another reason for its being a modern play is that it speaks very clearly to, one might say, the intellectual. Hamlet is somebody who's had a high degree of formal education. Hamlet is somebody who feels that he understands the way that the world is running. But Hamlet is somebody who feels peculiarly impotent. And I think that this is also a factor of late 20th century life, that we live in a world where the politicians say that they want to get the government off our backs, but we're aware that more and more central government is being dirigiste, at least that's true in this country, and also, of course, that various non-political organizations, multinational companies and so on, are really calling the shots. So one of the things that Hamlet is about is the ability to perceive the way that the world is moving, but equally a feeling that it's very, very difficult to do anything about it. And in the end, Hamlet has to make a rather impulsive and violent gesture. And of course, what he does is end up by killing a lot of people and not necessarily setting the world to rights.
Is that what Hamlet wins to in the end, a better understanding of how the world actually works? Because at the beginning of the play, he's very much an adolescent. He bemoans the fact that the world does not conform to the way he thinks it ought to be.
Yes, I think he does, but it's a very salutary kind of lesson that he learns. Let me put it like this, and let me start to answer your question, that is, with memories of particular productions. It's become almost a commonplace for Hamlet to die laughing. Now, what does that laughter signify? I think possibly a simple answer would be that it signifies an awareness of absurdity, or possibly an awareness of that kind of impotence in the face of complexity that I was talking about a moment or so ago. The world is a very, very difficult place. It's very difficult to find satisfactory answers to the problems that beset us, although it's absolutely crucial to frame those problems as accurately as we can.
That was very provocative, yes, in a short period of time. He, again, was just an absolutely splendid host to us over in England. He's the chair of the English department at the University of Sheffield and has written widely on Elizabethan popular theater and on Renaissance drama. And I'm going to once more plug his book called An Introduction to the Variety of Criticism of Hamlet by Michael Hattaway. And I recommend this highly. It's a very thin book. But it will give you, just 100 pages or so, but it'll give you a real sense of the debates over time on the issues in this play, and it'll guide your reading, and for that reason I think it's quite good. It won't give you a lot of conclusions, but it'll guide your reading. What did he say that provoked you? Yeah.
Well, not necessarily provoked, but you were making mention that this is a modern play.
Yes.
Maybe it's not that it's so modern, maybe it's the human nature hasn't changed.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Yes, it's so hard. There are forces at work in the world that are, so damned hard to understand. Huh? We've made so many efforts to understand those forces, and we still feel like we're groping, don't we? And then secondly, how do you control what you can't understand? And there's always that human need to control, right? To guide things, to get the desirable ends. And you discover pretty early on you can't do that either, you know? So you're in a world you don't understand and you can't control. Well, I don't know about you, but I want to get me to a nunnery, you know? No, but what I mean by that is it takes a certain courage there are a number of ways you can confront this fact. One of them is to withdraw from the world and just say, my God, you know, it's just too much. It's too crazy. It's all hazard. It's all guess. It's all darkness. It's all blindness. So, you know, I'm just going to withdraw from it. The other is to somehow hazard act in a world in which the consequences for your act really can't be known. We've seen this before, haven't we? Remember Aeneas acting, yes, and not knowing that the consequences of these actions were going to prove so destructive. That marvelous scene at the end of Hamlet where the bodies are just, I mean, you in the theater, it is just, the little hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Boom, 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 as they fall. And you realize that before them has fallen Ophelia and Polonius, and you realize all the people who are dying for that seemingly simple command of his father at the beginning of the play to avenge his death. What a world this is, where to act in it, to act in a world of seeming, to act in a world of actors. You know, the play within the play is marvelously meaningful, isn't it? Mm-hmm. We are all, you've heard this line from Shakespeare, you know, we're all players on the stage, you know. We're donning masks all the time. And Hamlet dons a mask during the course of the play. He has to learn that to act in this world, you sometimes have to take on the disguises of this world. You have to take on the means of this world. He becomes mad. You know, it's an act. You know, yeah, exactly. It's an act. He is not what he seems to be. First words out of his mouth in the play, when his mother asks him to take off his inky cloak. He says, "Seems, madam?" You know, it seems, "Seems, madam? I know not seems." And what he points out is that he's the only one in the play, he says at that point, where the outward appearance perfectly matches the inner state. He is a whole person. We have all sorts of psychological babble now to describe when the outer person is in sync with the inner person. It's a state much to be desired. You don't need me to tell you that. And it's a state that's very difficult to arrive at.
What courage it takes just to live.
Yes, and I wonder if that is not why Hamlet gets the burial he gets at the end of the play, where Shakespeare perhaps is suggesting to us that the new battlefield, maybe Hamlet really is heroic. Maybe he's even more heroic than his father, you know. And perhaps the new battlefield is not the battlefield of Iliad. It's not the battlefield of Fortinbras, you know. It's the battlefield inside.
But isn't it Fortinbras who says, you know, he might have been a good king.
Yeah.
He would have. He has qualities that we need.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's why he chose to give him that burial.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. You know, very well put. Yeah.
I thought what a burden it must be for a young man to live up to the expectations of his father, because his father was the activator of the whole thing.
That's the classic male dilemma, isn't it? It's not fashionable to talk about, well, it's starting to become actually fashionable to talk about gender studies in terms of males, too. But yeah, that is the burden, is the expectation of the father. And the expectation of the father is almost always beyond reach. You know, it creates all sorts of difficulties. As long as I'm on gender, we don't talk about Ophelia at all, you know, and the woman who comes out of this play, perhaps more famous than anybody other than Hamlet, is Ophelia. Do you know that? In art, she is everywhere. It's so strange, or is it not? Let's talk about Ophelia for a bit.
Perhaps she was the innocence in this intriguing, full of intrigue court.
Yeah.
She was a sweetness and innocence.
Well, that's the way the males looked at her.
On her because of her father saying, you can't. But why wasn't he saying a lot sooner? Her brother saying, you must not.
And she
says, well, how about you? And he can't believe she would say that.
Yes, yeah. You know, I've read feminist criticism of the play that suggests that Ophelia's response in madness is the perfectly appropriate response to the world she finds herself in.
You said you were going to bring us...
Well, I'm doing it right now. Let's use this as an example. But yeah, you know, it's the woman who's always going mad, right? It's Dido. It's the excess of passion. You know, you don't see guys going mad, do you? You know, you see Hamlet feigning madness, you know, but you don't see them going nuts, you know. Let me continue the idea and then I can... Look at the way Ophelia is put upon by the men around her. It's unbelievable. She loves her Hamlet, right? We always have a student somewhere along the line, somebody in the back of the hand, do they sleep together? And there's the classic line that Olivier tells, that when the manager of his acting company at the Royal Vic was asked the same question, he responded, in my company every night. What a wonderful answer. Did they or did they not? Well, it doesn't really matter. But they were lovers, whether it was physical or not. Interesting that this is even an issue because, of course, it's only an issue for the woman, right? Isn't that what Laertes and Polonius are so worried about? She's going to lose her virginity as if it's some bargaining chip, you know, that is going to make her worthy of a male. And if she loses it, then she's not going to be worthy anymore. You all with me? It's like a piece of property that is valued or devalued on the basis of that single experience. It's crazy.
That was true. Marriage makes.
Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. And so Laertes says, all right, you know, you got to stay away from Hamlet. I mean, she loves the guy, you know, and you got to stay away from him because he's dangerous, and you can't believe what he says. But he seems to have been honest with me, she says, you know. His words seem to, yeah, but you can't trust him because he's a royal and you never know, they can't make their own decisions. And Polonius wanders in, and Polonius, you know, wherever Polonius wanders, his mouth gets him in trouble, you know. He's such a windbag. And he comes in and hears this, what are you talking about? We're talking about Hamlet. I don't want you to see Hamlet anymore, that's it. Boom. And poor Ophelia obeys, you know. And boy, does that begin her downfall, huh? Yeah. Then Hamlet uses her, you know. Then the next scene, Hamlet's using her, you know. Then she becomes bait in a trap, you know. And it's no wonder she went mad. I mean, her fate is not in her hands. Her fate is in the hands of the males around her. And maybe that madness response is the appropriate response in such a world.
I think so, because, you know, the little songs that she sings that are scattered all through it, there's 5 or 6 of them, they're all about lost love and betrayal and death.
Yeah.
And the kind of things that extended over any period of time create a very, very deep depression. And we know clinically, you know, that depressions, people who cannot find their way out of their depression very often choose suicide. So
Sure.
that really, it's not so surprising.
And the only way out for an Ophelia is through another male. That's the only possible way out for her. She doesn't have the free agency to be able to say, to hell with all of you, you know. I'm going to do what I think is right. Can't do it in this world. This world crushes her. And it's very sad. And she becomes a very sympathetic creature in the process. In the Victorian age, of course, she was all sweetness and light. You know, she was this, oh, sweet, wonderful, virginal thing. And we were to feel this great sense of loss because she was this sweet, virginal thing. But that is to look at her through the terms of Laertes, Polonius, and Hamlet. And that's not, I think, the best way into her.
Had a good ally in Gertrude, because at the end, when she was burying her, she hoped that she would be her son's marriage.
Did you all notice that? Good for you to point that out. Did you all notice the warmth and depth of feeling that Gertrude feels for her? Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Well, you must remember that Hamlet was approaching her. If she was the shy person that she seemed to be, and she had known him all her life, he was coming to her. She wasn't chasing him and making advances at all.
Oh, absolutely.
So that to these sudden accusations is about what? What have I done?
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. It makes it even the more, makes her even the more pathetic.
Right.
Yeah, I agree completely. She did nothing untoward, as they say. Yeah.
Things happened to her rather than
Absolutely, she's acted upon. Yeah, she cannot. That's ultimately, I think, the real tragedy for Ophelia, is that she cannot even be an actor. You know.
No, and it does seem that the perceptions of her brother and her father were out of line with reality, and the other woman, Gertrude, did know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And felt it would be, but then Ophelia didn't have this courage of her convictions. If what her relationship is with Hamlet, we only have the one scene, but she didn't believe in their relationship enough, or she wasn't strong enough, or what. You wonder if Gertrude would have responded the same way in the same situation.
Yeah, maybe not, don't you? Now we're into Hamlet's boyhood, you know? Yeah, right.
She's such a youth, though, at this point in time,
Yeah.
and so she would look to her father for guidance.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a political figure, a powerful political figure. He knows the way of court.
You guys are doing something that critics did in the 19th into the early 20th century that was very revealing with the new interest in psychoanalysis of the time. They would write early histories of Shakespearean characters. Isn't that a fascinating notion? I mean, whole books written on what Hamlet's formative years were like and what Ophelia's formative years were like in an effort to sketch out the character.
What was it based on?
Oh, they were invented, of course, but they were, you know, they're based on because he or she acted in a certain way at this time. These were the things that.
I'm thinking, wow, that must have been just pure conjecture.
Oh, of course it was. Yeah. Oh, it was just great fun. You know, it was reading about these great characters that you had read about in school. You know, and getting another point of view on them.
Well, she had a certain amount of impetuosity too. Then, she was an adolescent also.
Yes, and she does act. Let's not miss. There is one act, and maybe her one act again is so modern, so defining of the existential condition, is her one act is suicide. You know?
I mean, every time I read the description of the thing, I get the impression that she fell in.
Yeah, it was an accident.
And she just didn't take the act of saving herself.
Yes,
and even her suicide is passive.
I agree. Even her suicide, well, all right, passive might be one way to say it. Another way of saying it is even her suicide is ambiguous, as everything else in the world of this play is ambiguous. You're absolutely right. It does seem like she was just she wandered into the water while singing distractedly. And indeed, some of the great art of Ophelia in the 19th century has her lying down in a shallow riverbed. Some of you may have seen these. Yeah, you have seen them, yeah. And really quite remarkable, and they wreathe her hair with a garland. And frequently, there are flowers all over her, repeating the garden image. The garden, this garden image of Milton does something with the garden. Oh, never mind. No, I did it. I got it in. Yeah.
Continuing with the garden image, would you say that she was the scapegoat of the whole production? You know, someone had to be the one that they offered up. Seems to me it would be Ophelia.
I don't think so, actually. No, I don't think a scapegoat would be the word I would use. The scapegoat, if there, that's a heavy question I never thought of. It would probably occur in the last scene, and my guess is it's Hamlet who is the scape. If there is a scape in the old Greek tragic sense, I think it would probably be Hamlet. I promised I got to do this because you wanted to say something earlier.
Kind of a scapegoat, probably closer to Fall Guy.
Yeah, it's too easy. Yeah. She's too easy.
I find fault with Hamlet's lack of emotion, other than the revenge of the murder. Murder to him means murder of his uncle. I mean, he murdered Polonius.
Yep.
And Ophelia, and there was really a very little lack of emotion. We were talking about comparing Hamlet with Aeneas, and Aeneas seems much more of a mature person to me. I mean, he was told to do this thing, and yet he voiced his regrets. Hamlet never seems to. Murder isn't murder to him. It's just the murder that he wants to
The one that
commit.
disturbs us is the Polonius one, isn't it? Where all he'll say is, I mistook you for your better, you know, and he doesn't really feel any remorse. Although, of course, Polonius is an enemy to him, and Polonius is part of a plot conspiring against him. And maybe that says something about the world of this play as much as it does, and I agree with you, say something about Hamlet. Interesting that the change in Hamlet occurs, as it so often does in Shakespeare, with a change of costume. It's when Hamlet comes back from England in the sea traveler's garb, which would be very simple, unlike the black velvet that he might have been wearing earlier in the play. Just a simple linen costume. That his whole view of death, the democratizer, if I may say that, you know, has changed things, and he's much more willing to put himself in the hands of, do I dare say Providence in a play like this? But you know what I mean. Yeah.
He does say there's a divinity that shapes our end.
Yes.
Where Aeneas had help from the gods. You know, Hamlet acted alone, really.
Yeah.
Well, plus Aeneas was more mature.
Yes, indeed.
He was
of
a
course.
man with
He
a family and
was.
a
Good moral of life behind him, and still a good amount ahead of him. But, you know, and Barb, I have a tough time with you blaming him for Ophelia in the sense, you know, that he didn't know about that. And when he did find out when he came back from England, you know.
Yeah, he was devastated.
He was devastated.
And in fact, that's what causes the confrontation with Laertes, is that he sees Laertes' grief as almost excessive compared to his own.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because he really did love her, but he was distracted from that by this other business.
Her, though.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
And he didn't protest I mean, he did say that he had loved her, you know, but he didn't really go on about it you don't see any real depth of emotion once she does die. He says some things, but not enough.
He was feigning madness then.
At the time.
Well,
we're left with all of these now. Look, we're left with all these incoherent assertions at the end of the play, and I don't mean that they're not right. I mean they're not cohering because we don't have time, and that's the experience of the play. And we're out of time, but not out of time thinking about Hamlet. I hope. Thanks. We'll see you next time. Great.